Yo, what's up everybody? It's Josh here with the Manchise, and in today's video we are going to be going over my defender rankings for this upcoming Fantasy EPL season. And of course, in the first slot, should be no surprise, it's Trent Alexander-Arnold from Liverpool. Liverpool's one of the best teams in the Premier League. Beyond that, Trent Alexander-Arnold, he's on set-piece duty, so lots of opportunities for racking up assists, lots of opportunities for racking up clean sheets with Liverpool, and then he'll probably chip in a few goals as well, so you can't go wrong with Trent Alexander-Arnold. Number 2 is Joao Cancelo from Man City. He's in a similar situation as Trent Alexander-Arnold. He's not going to have as many set-piece opportunities. I think Man City will be a little bit better defensively than Liverpool this season. They were last year. I think according to the rankings here, are the ratings by 538, they're about the same, 0.3. But you can see Man City has a bigger goal differential, which means Joao Cancelo should be involved in more goal-scoring opportunities. And the thing about Joao Cancelo is he can play on the left, he can play on the right, he's very versatile. And City just sold off Zinchenko. They don't have a lot of depth behind Kyle Walker and Joao Cancelo at this point. So I would expect Cancelo to just rack up major minutes. Now the transfer window isn't over yet, and they're in the market. There were some discussions that they would be pursuing Cucurella. Brighton's got a crazy high valuation on him at 50 million. I don't think Man City wants to spend that much money on someone who would probably be a backup this year in the fullback role, but can't go wrong with Trent Alexander-Arnold or Joao Cancelo. And then number 3 in my rankings is another Liverpool fullback, and that's Andrew Robertson. Hey, when Andrew Robertson is healthy, he's just as productive on a per-match basis than Cancelo and Alexander-Arnold. I think Andrew Robertson is entirely too low in the default rankings on draft.fantasypremierleague.com. He's a guy that you should feel comfortable drafting as early as the second round. To be honest, most of the defenders in the default rankings are way too low. A cheap way to get points when you're playing fantasy Premier League soccer is to target clean sheets, which means to target defenders and goalkeepers on really good teams, because a clean sheet is worth 6 points. So you don't need guys to score 20 goals and have 10 assists for them to put up a ton of numbers. Trent Alexander-Arnold was like a top 5 scorer last year in fantasy. And as I mentioned, Andrew Robertson, as long as he's healthy and he's on the pitch, I mean, he's another guy that's going to contribute to goals, and he's also going to rack up a ton of clean sheets. After Andrew Robertson is Reece James. I've hit on this in the 2 previous videos, the forward rankings, the midfield rankings. We'll see what ends up happening with Chelsea and their formation. They like to go with the 3 center backs and the 2 wing backs. And of course, the wing back on the right-hand side is Reece James. And if they continue to play in that formation, then that means Reece James should be out wide and have ton of offensive opportunities. I would expect for him to rack up a bunch of assists and potentially some goals as well. We saw that when he was healthy last year, he put up really good numbers. So Reece James is another guy that you could probably take as early as the second round. After Reece James, we have Virgil van Dijk. That's the first true center back on the list. And Van Dijk's probably not going to score too many goals. He might have a header or two that he'll be able to hit in or head in from the box off of a corner kick. But with a guy like Van Dijk, you're not banking on him scoring goals. Instead, you're banking on Liverpool having a bunch of clean sheets, and I think that's certainly going to be the case this upcoming season. Van Dijk is the number 1 option at the center back position for Liverpool, so he's going to accumulate a lot of minutes, and that's going to lead to a lot of fantasy production. And Ruben Diaz is in the same boat. He is the number 1 center back for Man City. So again, not much of an aerial threat, Probably isn't going to score too many goals, but with Man City, I would expect Ruben Diaz to rack up a ton of fantasy points just based on clean sheets alone. And right now, with Laporte being hurt and Stones was away from the team, I would expect that Ruben Diaz is going to get a ton of playing time to start off the season. Even last year, at times where Stones and Laporte were healthy, Diaz was pretty much on the pitch every week. So, he's a guy that you can take pretty early in your fantasy drafts, just kind of slot him in each week, and you're going to get production out of him. After Ruben Diaz is Ivan Perisic. Perisic is one of the trickier defenders to rank, and I think there's a couple different reasons why. The first being is that he doesn't have a nailed-on role at this point. We don't know what Tottenham's going to do from a formation perspective. They could also play with 3 center backs and then, have Perisic on the left wing and either Emerson or Doherty on the right wing. If they did that, that would be a best-case scenario if you have Perisic on your team because he's going to be more involved offensively. Perisic in the past, and he's gotten a little bit older, has experience playing that left mid or left wing role for his clubs. And he's good offensively. I think he scored 8 goals last year and had like 6 or 7 assists over in Serie A. But those are the 2 other things that are kind of risky when it comes to drafting Perisic. One is his age. He's 33 years old, so he's not getting any younger. And then 2, he's moving from Serie A over to the Premier League. I've talked about this before. Oftentimes, it takes a little bit of time for these players to get acclimated to playing in a more physical, you could even argue more skilled league, or at least in my opinion, it's definitely the deepest league in professional soccer. So a lot of upside with Perisic. Here's the thing with Perisic, though. A lot of different variables. He could end up being no good at all for fantasy purposes, or he could be the guy that you're looking back at the end of the year that like, hey, I had an opportunity to draft this guy in the middle rounds and I just passed on him, and it should have been so obvious to me that he would be a top scoring defender. So, that's one of those risk assessments that your risk versus reward assessments that you're going to have to make during your draft. And if you are going to draft Perisic, then I recommend that you bring in some center backs from Man City or Liverpool that you can get a little bit later, like Stones, Laporte, Joel Matip, those type of guys, to just supplement the production from the defender position in case Perisic, doesn't evolve into the player that we think he's capable of becoming. And Ben Chilwell's in a similar situation because Ben Chilwell, from a fantasy points per game production standpoint, was the number 1 defender in the Premier League last year. I think he averaged something like 7 fantasy points per game. It was a ridiculous number. But the problem with Ben Chilwell is he doesn't stay healthy. So he's super productive when he's on the pitch, but over the past 2 seasons with Chelsea, he's missed a ton of time. So this is another one. It's a risky pick. If you're going to take a guy like Ben Chilwell, just make sure you supplement the rest of your defenders with guys that are going to accumulate minutes. Chilwell is falling down the boards right now, and that's because Cucurella, there's some rumors that Cucurella could end up with Chelsea and he would play in a similar position. But I've also read that they kind of that the manager for Chelsea, he thinks that Cucurella and Chilwell could be on the pitch at the same time. I don't know if that's truly the case or if that's just kind of manager speak. Either way, if you're going to draft Ben Chilwell, just be aware that A, he could miss a bunch of time, and B, he could lose his spot if they do bring in Cucurella, which there's some conflicting reports as to whether or not they've already agreed to personal terms, and Brighton has already accepted the $50 million valuation. But if that does happen, he could eventually lose his spot. After Ben Chilwell is Kieran Trippier. I love Kieran Trippier. He's a guy that I'm targeting in all of my drafts. especially because he's a guy that you can get later in a lot of drafts, depending on who you're drafting with and how savvy the other owners are in your league. But the nice thing about Trippier is Newcastle's improved, and Trippier gets set pieces. He also handles corners. Trippier played well last year for Newcastle, and that Newcastle side was far less talented than they're going to be this year. And he did miss some time due to injury, but Trippier is a guy that I'm definitely targeting in all of my fantasy drafts. After Trippier, I have a couple center backs here: Joel Matip, Kalidou Koulibaly, and Aymeric Laporte. So all three of these guys play on top teams in the Premier League. Again, if you're looking at the 538 defensive ratings, Man City, Liverpool, and Chelsea are at the top of the list there. So these guys are going to have clean sheets or clean sheet opportunities just simply because the teams they play on, and they should rack up a ton of minutes. I think Koulibaly is going to be the number one center back for Chelsea because they lost Christensen. Thiago Silva is getting older, and Azpilicueta might leave. He wants to go to Barcelona from what I've heard. So I would expect Koulibaly to rack up a ton of minutes, and like I said, they might even play three at the back, so he's definitely going to be on the pitch a lot. After that little tier of center backs, then we're going to start to take a look at some fullbacks here. We have Matty Cash, Alexander Zinchenko, Kyle Walker, and Aaron Cresswell, and these you can kind of probably put in whatever order you want based on your preferences. I have Matty Cash number one there out of that group just because I think he's got the clearest path to accumulating a ton of minutes out of that bunch, right? Now, the downfall with Matty Cash is he plays for Villa, so there's going to be less clean sheet opportunities, but he's also, outside of Zinchenko, probably the most offensively gifted fullback out of that group. So I think it's a nice balance there between racking up a lot of minutes. Villa's going to get some clean sheets, and then in addition to that, he's going to rack up some assists because he's pretty solid going offensively for Villa. Zinchenko is right below Matty Cash. Zinchenko's not going to be the number one left back for Arsenal, but because Tierney's hurt right now, he should get the bulk of the minutes at that position. And I don't know how long Tierney's going to be out. Even when Tierney gets back, Tierney has a history of always being banged up, very similar to Chilwell. So I think Zinchenko's a guy that's good to target because he's not only going to accumulate a lot of minutes at the beginning of the season, but he's also a versatile player. Internationally for Ukraine, he actually plays in the midfield, and Arsenal needs some help in the midfield. I mean, how many more seasons are they going to roll out Xhaka? I mean, I know they have Partey and Odegaard there, but I think ideally for them, what they would envision is Tierney gets back to health. He plays on the left wing or left back, and then Zinchenko slots into the midfield and racks up some time there. And that's, that would be super beneficial. A couple seasons ago, Stuart Dallas for Leeds, he was a guy that you could slot in as a defender and was playing in the midfield and ended up being one of the best fantasy defenders that year. And the reason for that is when you play in the midfield, you're going to have a chance to be more offensively involved. But because you're still labeled a defender, at least according to the Fantasy Premier League, when there are shutouts, you're getting all those points for clean sheets. So, Zinchenko's a guy that you definitely want to target. Then I have Kyle Walker there. Now, Kyle Walker, he's pretty much been a part-time player the past 2 seasons, which makes sense based on his style of play. He's very physical. He relies on his athleticism and speed, and he's only getting older. But this year, it looks like he's going to have to play a ton. And we talked a little bit about this when I was discussing Joel Cancelo. But right now, Cancelo and Kyle Walker are the 2 main options for Man City, and they don't have a ton of depth behind those guys. So unless Man City brings in another fullback, and even if they do, the starts this weekend. It's going to take them some time to get acclimated to the team and Pep's system. Kyle Walker should play a lot, so I think Kyle Walker's being very undervalued this year in drafts, and he's a guy that I would certainly recommend targeting. And then Cresswell, beyond Kyle Walker. Cresswell's kind of similar to Matty Cash from a standpoint that, you know, they don't play on elite teams, so there's not going to be as many clean sheet opportunities. But Cresswell does get involved offensively, which is nice. And he's a guy that should rack up a lot of minutes. So again, he's a nice guy to just have on your team, even if he's not going to start week to week. He's a guy that you could always bring off the bench, and in certain matchups, he's a guy that you would certainly want to play. And then after Cresswell, I have Gabriel from Arsenal. I think he is their best defender and their best center back. I've talked about in my previous videos how much I do like Arsenal this year. I would expect them to have a decent amount of clean sheets, so that's nice. And Gabriel's actually pretty good in the air. He's definitely an aerial threat, so he might score 4 or 5 goals on headers this season, which would just be a nice added bonus. After Gabriel, then I have Lucas Digne. That's the other wing back for Aston Villa, or fullback for Aston Villa. He plays on the left. You know, he's in a similar situation as Matty Cash. I mean, honestly, I could probably put Digne up a little bit higher. I just think Cash has more upside because he's younger, and there's just, you know, more potential for him to grow. I think we probably, you know, the Digne of the past few seasons is the Digne we're going to see this year for Villa. But again, he's kind of in a similar situation as Cresswell. Beyond Digne, I have Thiago Silva. So Thiago Silva is probably the second best center back at this point in his career for Chelsea. He's going to get a lot of time, at least I would think. But he is older, so I don't think he'll play as much as Koulibaly. Also, I don't expect him to be too much of an aerial threat. So again, this is where you're just targeting a good team and trying to get some cheap points and clean sheets. Beyond Thiago Silva, I have Kieran Tierney. We talked about him. He would certainly be much higher in my rankings if he was healthy to begin the season, and we knew that he was going to play. And I mean, he's a great defender. You know, he gets involved offensively for Arsenal. You know, he's a really good player, and unfortunately he can't stay healthy. And on top of that, they went out and signed Zinchenko, so there's a little bit more competition in the left back role. So he's definitely a risky pick. I think he goes probably too high in a lot of the drafts that I see, a little bit too rich for my blood at least. But like I said, he's a risky, you know, risk reward type of guy that you could get if he falls in your draft. Again, just sit him on the bench until his role becomes defined. And if he does get healthy and takes over that left back position for Arsenal, you know, that's basically going to be a steal. Beyond Tierney, I have Eric Dyer. He's one of the center backs for Tottenham. Again, just trying to chase clean sheets here for one of the better teams in the Premier League. He's not going to offer much from an offensive standpoint. With that being said, Dyer used to play as a defensive center mid. I think those days are over, but there's a possibility with injuries or something like that they could roll him into that position or into that role on the pitch. And if they do, again, that's just a nice little benefit because he could potentially have more opportunities in that role. And then after Dyer, I have a few fullbacks here, starting with Matt Targett, Mark Cucurella, Marcos Alonso. I think all those guys are kind of in a similar situation. Outside of Cucurella, because he could potentially get transferred to Man City or Chelsea, but with where things stand currently today, with Cucurella still being with Brighton, I think he's in a similar spot as Matt Targett or Marcos Alonso. You know, starting with Targett, he will take set pieces from time to time. He's okay offensively as a fullback. He's really not the quickest fullback, but he can rope in some crosses, which is nice. So he could put up some assists, and as I'd mentioned, Newcastle should be better this year. And then with Cucurella, I mean, he's a great player, but he plays for Brighton, so not as many clean sheet opportunities. though they are ranked rated pretty solidly by 538 from a defensive standpoint. So, but with Cucurella, I think if you're drafting him, you're shooting for the stars and you're hoping that he ends up with Chelsea or Man City. And then Marcos Alonso, he's really good offensively, shaky defensively. If Chelsea goes with the 3-back formation, he would be the left wing back, you would assume, playing opposite of Reece James. So the nice thing about that is there should be a lot of offensive opportunities. They're going to want him out wide and going forward. So he's a guy that you can certainly target, but Marcos Alonso is getting older. He's not going to play as many minutes. He'll probably be subbed out or even start some games on the bench and then be subbed in, depending on the formation that they roll out. And then also there's just rumors of him wanting to leave Chelsea. So, but at this point in the draft, when you're taking these types of defenders, these are just mostly shots in the dark, and you probably are better off reaching for upside. So that's why I have Alonso where I do. And then I have both the Man City center backs, John Stones and Nathan Ake. And what I've been doing in a lot of my drafts, I've been taking a combination of Stones and Ake as my 4th and 5th defenders. And the reason for that is because Laporte is out right now. And with Laporte being out, that means one of those guys are going to start. You would assume it would be Stones, but Stones might not be fit. He might not be informed to start the season, so it could be Ake as the center back. And then, the other thing is, well, what happens if Laporte comes back? Because he'll probably slot in and take over for Stones eventually when he gets back. That's okay, because Man City still likes to rotate, so I still think there's going to be minutes to be had there for guys like Stones and Ake. And then also, as I mentioned, they don't have a ton of depth at the fullback position. So Ake has experience playing as a left back. So if they're going to give Walker the occasional match off to give him some rest, what I would expect them to do is move Cancelo from the left back position over to the right back position. That's his more natural position anyway, and then put Ake in as the left back. So I think, at least in the very beginning of the season, there are going to be some matches where both Stones and Ake will be on the field. And to get that type of production or potential production that late in a fantasy draft, to me, just screams value. After Ake, I have Matt Doherty. Now, Matt Doherty would probably be a little bit higher up on the list if we knew where his fitness was at and if we knew that he had a defined role for Tottenham. Tottenham could go 3 center backs this year, and if they do that, like I said, Perisic would be the left wing back, and I think ideally they would want Doherty as the right wing back. But again, it just comes down to how fit he's going to be. And they also have Emerson. Even in a scenario where Doherty ends up getting a lot of playing time, I still think he'll split time with Emerson. They're both pretty solid fullbacks, so that's why I have Doherty a little bit lower on the list here in my rankings. From there, I have Saliba from Arsenal. In my opinion, he's their second best center back. Now, he was loaned out last year, and he played really well. So now they brought him back, and he's in my opinion, in the preseason, their best pairing at the center back position is Gabriel and Saliba. So I just think there's some upside there because I am high on Arsenal. And if Saliba ends up nailing down that starting center back role, he's a great guy that you can get late in drafts. Then I have Diogo Dalot there. Looks like Dalot is going to start for Man U. Dalot is solid offensively as well. Unfortunately, Man U, they don't get their fullbacks too involved offensively. At least they haven't in the past few seasons. Different manager now, so that could change. So there's some upside with Dalot. He's a guy that you can certainly take later in drafts as like your 4th or 5th defender, and he could be productive, but it's not promised at this point. Beyond Dalot, I have Christian Romero, another Tottenham center back. Dyer, Romero. I don't know who's going to be the number one guy there and who's ultimately going to accumulate the most minutes. I think in a perfect world for Tottenham because they spent a bunch of money on Romero, that Romero develops into that guy, but we've yet to see it. After Romero, I have Ryan Ait-Nouri from Wolves, and with Nouri, he's a young player and he showed a lot of potential last year and showed a lot of promise. I don't think Wolves is going to score a lot of goals this year, so that's really the number one concern that I have. And they've also been known to rotate their wingbacks. They also have Semedo. They have Johnny. So there's a couple different guys there. So he's a little bit lower in my rankings simply because they're going to rotate, and I don't think they're going to score a lot of goals. I also don't think they're going to be very good this year, so I don't think there's going to be as many clean sheet opportunities. Then I have Diego Carlos, who Aston Villa went out and spent some money on, and I think he's going to be their number one center back. But he's low in the rankings because I think there's going to be a rotation there. I think Konsa and Mings are also going to get some time. We're probably going to see a rotation of the three of those. I like Carlos the best, but he also doesn't offer a ton of offensive upside. And the next two guys that I have in my rankings here are Varane and Harry Maguire, both for Man U. Man U wasn't great last year, especially defensively. Not nearly as many clean sheets as you would have hoped for if you had one of these guys on your team. And I don't know if they've fixed their defensive woes at this point. Dalot, we've already talked about. He's going to be the main guy on the right-hand side. And he's probably better offensively than he is defensively. So I'm not getting to a ton of Varane and Maguire in my drafts. Now, they also brought in Lisandro Martinez, who I also have on the list here. And it's possible, if Harry Maguire continues to struggle, that Lisandro Martinez ends up being a starting center back. But Lisandro Martinez also has experience playing as a defensive mid. So again, there's some upside there with drafting a guy like Lisandro Martinez in a scenario where he ends up playing in that pivot role for Man U, because it could just lead to some more production. The only thing with Lisandro Martinez is he's making a big jump from playing over in the Netherlands now to here in England. And I think it's just going to take him a little while to get accustomed to the Premier League. So I think, at least to start off the season, we're going to see Varane and Maguire as the two starting center backs. And then eventually they're going to sprinkle in Lisandro Martinez, and we'll see where it goes from there. And then beyond Lisandro Martinez, I have another group of center backs here, and these can all kind of be adjusted based on your preferences. I have Sven Botman from Newcastle. He was just brought to the club, and he should be their number one guy. Dan Burn, who they brought in towards the end of last year, he'll probably be the number two guy there. They still have Fabian Schär, I believe, so he might be rotated in as well. I'm not exactly sure, and that's why these guys are a little bit lower in the rankings. Wesley Fofana's there from Leicester. The reason why he's as low as he is, I guess there's two reasons. One, there's a lot of rumors that he could be transferred from Leicester to Barcelona. So, you don't want to waste a draft pick on a guy that's not even going to be able to play for you. But two, I just am not that high on Leicester this season. After Fofana, I have Takahiro Tomiyasu. So with Tomiyasu, he's just not healthy right now. I think when he plays, he's a really good player. He's, the right back for Arsenal. And I think in an ideal world, it would be, on the left-hand side, Kieran Tierney, Gabriel, and then either Ben White or Saliba, and then on the right-hand side, Tomiyasu. But right now he's banged up, and it looks like Ben White's accumulating some minutes on the right-hand side, and he's playing as a right back. So I have Tomiyasu a little bit lower in the rankings for those two reasons. One, he's banged up, not healthy heading into the season. And two, because he could lose his spot. If Arsenal starts off hot and Saliba's playing center back and Ben White's playing right back and they start, racking up some clean sheets, they might be hesitant to just put Tomiyasu back into the starting lineup. From there, James Tarkowski with Everton. He's going to be their number one center back. He'll probably rack up a ton of minutes, but I am not high on Everton at all, so there's not a lot of offensive opportunity there. There's also probably not a ton of opportunities for clean sheets, but Tarkowski's going to rack up a lot of minutes. Connor Cody, he's going to probably be the number one center back for Wolves. He'll probably rack up a lot of minutes. He actually had a pretty productive fantasy season last year, but I don't expect him to be able to capture that performance again. I don't think Wolves will be as good as they were last season, especially defensively. Towards the end of the year, they just ended up becoming like a sieve. After Cody, I have Ricardo Pereira, who's a great player, never healthy. Again, he's a risky guy to draft, but he's a guy that you could take as your fifth defender because when he plays, he can be pretty productive from an offensive standpoint. But again, not thinking there's going to be a lot of opportunities for clean sheets with Leicester this season, especially because they just lost Schmeichel in goal. And beyond that, just some additional center backs and outside backs that could have some sort of upside. Johnny with Wolves, we talked about, he's going to be rotated in and out of the formation, but he does have some offensive upside. I have Chalobah there, who, if I knew Chelsea was definitely going to play three center backs in the back on a week-to-week basis, he would definitely be higher in my rankings. But at this point, I'm not sure, and they might just play two center backs. It's going to be Silva and Koulibaly, and in that case, Chalobah is going to be the odd man out. And then Vitaly Mykolenko from Everton, who he has some upside. He's a left back. They brought him in last year. He's still young, decent offensively, but again, I don't expect Everton to be too good this year, so he's just a guy that I'm not getting to too much of. Anyway, that concludes my defender rankings. Hopefully this information is useful to you and can help you in your drafts. If you liked the video, certainly give it a like and smash that subscribe button.